All right, welcome everybody to the October 27th EPPAC meeting. Today is a continuation of the meeting we had in September to discuss the development of conceptual bulk solutions. At that meeting, there was a lot of questions, even to start the meeting, just about the process of where we are in the CGPP and how this fits in, what the pieces of the bulk assessments are, and all that stuff. And then there was a bunch of questions and comments submitted after the meeting around specific assumptions, data requests, and next steps. And so we have gone back with the NYSERD and Quanta team to try to prepare a few new pieces of information, both a new presentation and a assumptions matrix that have been sent around. I think they've also been posted to the EPPAC website. But today is another chance to kind of go a little bit deeper on the conceptual bulk solutions pathway that we've been developing, and then have a chance for stakeholders to ask any more questions that they might have after the presentation. We've had a bit of a change in terms of the presenters. We've had a health issue with one of our presenters, and so we've had to turn over to John Berniger and a couple of folks from Quanta to try to take the reins, just so we can still keep this process moving and make sure we don't lose any time as we push forward with the bulk assessments and the stage 5 work. And so now I'm going to be handing it over to John Berniger from NYSERD to start walking through the slides today.
Thanks, Skylar. So as Skylar noted, we've prepared a couple of things for you after the last meeting. One is the assumptions matrix that was shared with everyone that Skylar referenced, and we won't be going through that in detail, but it's there for folks to take a look at and get answers to a number of the modeling and assumptions questions that were raised following the September 15th EPPAC meeting. And then we also have a follow-up presentation to what we provided on September 15th, really focusing on some additional information on the proxy conceptual solutions under development, particularly focusing on the potential impacts of their implementation, as well as some cost assumptions and preliminary cost estimates associated with those proxy conceptual solutions. But before we dive into that, I'd like to provide a bit of a high-level overview of this bulk assessment process for CGPP, because as Skylar noted, there were a number of process-related questions that came up both during and following the last EPPAC meeting, as well as some potential confusion about what we are and what we are not doing here. So with that in mind, if we take a step back and look at the CGPP order, it established an optional mechanism in stage 1 of the approved process to relax bulk transfer limits. And that optional mechanism required DPS staff to consult with the NYSO and EPPAC to determine whether any assessment of conceptual bulk solutions is warranted. As a reminder, as we went through this first cycle together, those stage 1 relaxation results were a bit of limited use in what they showed us, because we observed less flexibility in achieving Climate Act goals in the models than was expected at the time of the order. But nonetheless, DPS staff determined that assessing conceptual bulk solutions was still warranted based on the information that we did have from sensitivities conducted during that stage 1 analysis and other planning studies that are out there indicating the potential for bulk needs on the system as we move towards achieving Climate Act goals. So under that optional mechanism established in the order, NYSERDA, in consultation with and on behalf of DPS staff, is required to engage a consultant to identify potential bulk solutions and to develop estimates of their possible system benefits and cost. That is the work that Quanta has been undertaking and shared with EPPAC at the September 15th meeting, and we're following up on today. The order also required that those conceptual solutions be reviewed with EPPAC. That's what we went through on the 15th. And again, as I noted, is continuing in today's presentation. So what's next for this? What are we doing and what are we not doing? Well, again, if we go back to the order, the requirement is that on DPS staff's recommendation, one or more conceptual bulk solutions may be included in the stage 5 least cost analysis, and that evaluation included in the final report that goes to the commission. And so what that means is that Quanta's work is really focused on providing the necessary data for that stage 5 model, which does not consist of modeling detailed transmission projects, but rather potential increases in zonal transfer limits and the associated costs for achieving those transfer increases. That providing that data is the core focus of this work, and we are not going to be looking to fully identify a particular solution or need that could be advanced to the NISO. It's about providing information to that stage 5 analysis and in turn information to the commission that they can then use to determine whether or not to declare a bulk need driven by Climate Act requirements. It was also noted in the order that this process was not intended to displace the NISO's existing public policy transmission planning process, but rather to inform the Commission's review of proposed public policy requirements under that process. And as has always been true under that process, the Commission may declare a need outside of the NISO's 2-year cycle, driven by CGPP or other needs that come before the Commission. And within the context of CGPP itself, the Commission may consider other information in addition to that comes out of the stage 5 least cost analysis and in the report, CGPP report, that will come out of that analysis in determining whether or not to declare a need driven by Climate Act requirements. And also, if they determine there's a need, in defining the size and shape of any public policy transmission need or other way of defining that bulk need that would come out of this. So the detailed information that the Commission would include in any order defining a bulk need cannot come out of this CGPP bulk analysis alone. There's going to be additional necessary information that the Commission would need to consider in not just making a determination, but in actually defining the need. And what that means is that additional information submitted through comments and coming in response to the CGPP report, and also information that is available and can be put on the record from other analyses in addition to what we're doing here, could be considered by the Commission in any determination they would see fit to make. So I'm going to take a pause there before I jump into the presentation because I see that Liz came off camera. And Liz, please, if you have anything to add or adjust in how I presented that, please.
No, just thanks a lot. I just wanted to say I'm here. I was a few minutes late.
All right, thank you. So with that background in mind, I'm going to move forward with what we have to present today. I'm going to ask that we hold questions until I go through the presentation, and then I will be happy to address questions that come up. And as Skylar noted, we do have some of our consultants from Quanta also with us on the call who will be able to address any technical questions about the analysis that may come up. So as I noted earlier, this updated presentation is really intended to provide you with, 3 pieces of information in addition to what we presented on September 15th. One, we're going to share some of the impacts of the implementation of the proxy conceptual solutions under development. As we were also going to share some core cost assumptions associated with this work, and coming out of those cost assumptions, preliminary cost estimates for these proxy conceptual solutions. Jumping into that, as a reminder, there were several concepts that we presented on September 15th that we will, continue discussing today. Those were the west to east corridor and an extension of that west to east corridor into Zone J. There was also a north to south corridor in which we presented two alternatives for proxy conceptual solutions that might address some of the constraints observed in the analysis for that corridor. Alternative A was focusing on reinforcements through the northern New York area of concern in zones D and E. And alternative B was focusing on a new bulk transmission pathway directly from Zone D to Zone G. In the presentation today, we have information for you related to alternative B. The work for alternative A is still ongoing, and we will be able to share similar information regarding that separately once it's available. And then finally, we had a so-called integrated corridor looking at combining those concepts of those separate corridors. So diving into the corridors themselves, as a reminder, this is not new information. We presented this last time. But in the analysis that Quanta conducted, there were constraints in the southern tier areas of concern that were observed. And in order to attempt to alleviate those constraints, Quanta has been looking at a proxy conceptual solution that addresses the bottlenecks in the southern tier and facilitates the flow of upstate renewables towards the load centers further east and south. Now, we're not showing you a substation to substation and specific lines or routing map here, and that is on purpose, because again, what we're attempting to do, we do have specific solutions behind the scene driving the results of this analysis, but our goal here is to provide the data to the NISO that's necessary for that stage 5 modeling that would then inform a future commission decision, not to put forward any specific solution at this time. So there are detailed proxy conceptual solutions behind both the impacts and the cost information that we're presenting, but we are not sharing all of those details purposefully because of what this process is intended to do. But with that in mind, I can share with you that the proxy conceptual solution underlying this concept it comprises approximately 297 miles of greenfield overhead 345 kilovolt transmission. Similarly, if we look at the extension into Zone J, this is in addition to that 297 miles of greenfield overhead 345 kV that I just referenced. The additional segment extending the concept into Zone J is comprised of approximately 60 miles of underground 345 kV transmission to get from Zone G to Zone J. Looking then to the north to south corridor, again, as a reminder from the September 15th presentation, there were observed constraints in the northern New York areas of concern in zones D and E. And as I noted earlier, we only have information today related to that alternative B, which was looking at a new bulk pathway from zone D to zone G. And that proxy conceptual solution underlying this concept comprises approximately 200 miles of overhead transmission. And then finally, the integrated corridor. You just see illustrated here, it's that east to west corridor extended into zone J, combined with the alternative B north to south corridor as illustrated here. So with that reminder and a little bit of additional information on the underlying proxy conceptual solutions, we can look at a bit of summary of what I just presented as we were walking through those concepts again. That west to east corridor, as I noted, 297 miles of greenfield with a total cost estimate of approximately $1.2 billion. That extension from zone G into zone J also has a cost estimate of approximately $1.2 billion. In the north to south alternative B, the cost estimate that we have currently is approximately $800 million, which means that the total estimate for that entire integrated corridor, if it were to be considered, would be approximately $3.2 billion. The source of these cost estimates, the underlying assumptions driving them, Quanta looked at an average of publicly available interconnection study reports to derive some representative costs per mile by voltage class and whether it's overhead or underground transmission. And the resulting information feeding into this, these cost estimates that we're working on was for overhead 345 kV, it's about $4 million per mile. For overhead 230 kV, about $2 million per mile. And for underground 345, about $20 million per mile.
Hey, John, do you want to take questions now or late at the end?
I'd prefer to take them at the end, Bill, just to make sure I can get through everything. But
Great.
Feel free to leave your hand up in the queue.
Thanks.
Thank you. Moving then to potential benefits. Quanta analyzed the new maximum transfer limits along a number of interfaces and the potential increases that could be achieved with these proxy conceptual solutions that we've reviewed. This is really showing it from the perspective of that integrated corridor, looking at it from the biggest picture that we could. You can see that there are significant increases in many of the interface limits that were included in the models. And you get, and there in the furthest right column, you can get an idea of the potential cost per megawatt increase in those limits resulting from the implementation of these proxy conceptual solutions. I will note a couple of things for you. One, these are limits calculated in the model being leveraged by Quanta. utilizing practices that attempt to be or endeavor to be close to the way that these limits are analyzed, or consistent with the way that these limits are analyzed by the NISO, but cannot be fully representative or replace that NISO work. And so they should be viewed as limits within these models for the purpose of deriving the necessary modeling information that will feed into that stage 5 analysis, rather than actual identification of updated transfer limits. But with that in mind, you can see that depending upon the interfaces that we look at, you're looking at, maybe 400,000 to $3.4 million per megawatt in transfer limit increase, depending upon which interface. The least impacted interface in this analysis was Central East, because there were no direct reinforcements across that corridor modeled for the analysis we've done at this point, but it is impacted by the work here. The primary benefits are on Total East, Upney to Con Ed, and Dunwoody South and the Moses South interfaces. So in terms of next steps, before I turn to questions, we are continuing to refine these conceptual bulk solutions based on the feedback that we have received. We are also going to continue to refine the cost estimates, and that it can include taking additional information about underlying cost assumptions into account. And so I think we would welcome, any written feedback on cost assumptions that folks may have as we work towards that refinement. And then, as I've noted on a couple of occasions during the presentation, we're really looking to finalize these solutions so that we can derive the modeling data necessary for that stage 5 analysis, which again would consist of potential zonal transfer limit increases and associated costs for achieving those potential increases as represented by these proxy conceptual solutions. So with that, I'm happy to now take questions. And Bill, I think you're up first. Thank you for your patience.
Sure. Thanks, John. I was just curious about if you've made any estimates or have any estimates on the time it would take to implement these solutions, in addition to the cost. I'm curious about the timelines that you're assuming for the solutions for these.
Yeah, it's a good question. Bright, do you have anything you can add on anything Quant has considered, if at all, about the potential timeline for achieving these?
In terms of timeline, we are asked to make estimations of the timeline in constructing these.
Okay, so I don't think that they've looked at like
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that response. There was some feedback. What was that?
I think what I heard from Bright, and Bright, correct me if I'm wrong there, is they did not look to estimate actual build times for this exercise.
Okay.
That's a level of engineering analysis deeper than what we've been attempting to do here. I can tell you that consistent with the utilities approach, we're really focusing on that 2035 timeframe. And I think from a practical perspective, depending upon the entire scope of some of these and the development timelines for bulk transmission, we may see some, practical implementation between 2035 and 2040.
John, I'll just add to that if the commission decides that there's recognizes a transmission need and refers that to the NISO. The commission typically also provides an in-service date outer limit. So there will need to be consideration of timelines should any of these proceed.
Yeah, I think it probably would be helpful to have some estimate of a practical timeline in order to ensure that it's a viable solution as we're considering it for 2035. And I believe it is. I'm not arguing it isn't, but I think it's very important that we do understand, is it practical to be able to do it.
Yeah, but I think that's, very high level assessment.
Yes, and I think we have that, Bill. What we've been trying to do here is things that we're not trying to look at things that are blatantly unachievable for that 2035 timeframe, but the reality is, depending upon the scope and complexity of the need that the commission puts forward, just as there might be challenges with achieving certain local solutions by 2035, there may be challenges with achieving certain bulk solutions by 2035. But we're not being Pollyannish and putting forth something that's blatantly unachievable in that time frame.
Thank you.
And I don't see any other hands. So I'll give it a minute to see if there are other questions before I turn it back to Skylar. See if
Wow.
All right. Well, thank you all for your time and attention. I appreciate it.
Too quick. Radhika raised your hand.
And actually, Baba
Babatunde.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, I jumped the gun there. Sorry. I will get the presentation back up, but Babatunde, please go ahead.
If you're speaking, I can't hear you.
Maybe I could
Right,
ask
well,
my
yeah,
question.
yeah, please, Radhika, go ahead while Babatunde maybe figures out what's with the issue with his audio is.
Oh, one question I have on the next slide. I didn't do the math, but I'm curious from a methodology standpoint. When you say $1 per million per megawatt increase, is that relative to the cost of the whole solution? Or I guess I'm trying to understand how you calculate that. Yeah.
Yeah. Bright, can you address that question, please?
Given the west to east corridor and the connection down south to New York City, and also the north to south connecting the northern part, what we looked at was the various segments within the solutions that benefited specific interfaces, because the west to east corridor kind of stretches all the way from the west of New York to the east to zone G. But then we looked at, in terms of the cost calculation, we looked at the costs of the sections of the corridor that benefited the specific interfaces. Because, for example, the connection from zone G to J will not necessarily benefit much looking at, say, Central East or Total East. Yeah, so that's how we worked on it.
And does this mean that like all those bulk solutions are like additive here in terms of benefits? So you assume all happen as opposed to one happening out of the 3 or 4 solutions we are discussing, west to east, extension into J, north to south. So are you saying like this is the, so it's all or nothing essentially for the
No,
solutions?
no, Radhika. So
Yeah, so we in determining these, we actually did the integration and did the analysis in terms of the various components together and did the analysis. But evidently, based on the location of certain segments, you would realize that I mean, certain segments benefit some interfaces more than the others. Yeah.
and Radhika, let me follow up on that a little bit. Because I'm interpreting your question as whether or not when we feed information into that stage 5 analysis, it will be done so from an all or nothing perspective. And the answer is no. Both in these numbers presented here, you're looking at, as Bright noted, it's the cost for the portions of the proxy conceptual solutions that we've looked at that impact that interface compared to the achieved increase in transfer limits. And similarly, when we derive the zonal transfer increases and the costs associated with those, it's not going to be from an all or nothing perspective, but for, looking at each of the proxy conceptual solutions itself and how it's impacting those interfaces and what that means from a zonal transfer limit increase perspective, and what the cost associated with that is, would be the information that we provide to the NISO for that stage 5 least cost capacity expansion modeling.
So is there a way, I guess maybe just, John, are you saying that like this table is for the integrated corridor and then you will have essentially a version of this table for each of the bulk concepts?
Well, I want to be clear here. The table isn't just about the integrated corridor. So let me think about it like let's think about it as like example by example. Okay. So if we are looking at, say, the Moses South interface, right? As Bright noted, that extension from G to J is not really having a material impact on that. So there's transfer analysis with each of the conceptual solutions and each building block towards that integrated corridor that is feeding into the data that's in this table and will feed into what we provide to NISO. That bullet point above it is really more of an overall statement that when you look at it all collectively together, you see these significant increases across a number of the interfaces, but the values included in the table and the values we will provide for that stage 5 modeling are going to be on a proxy solution by proxy solution basis relative to the impacts that they provide to various zonal transfer limits.
Thank you. And do your guys in the modeling will be using that value dollar per million megawatt increase and the megawatt increase?
But I'm not going to answer for the NISO in terms of a modeling question, but I will tell you what we are providing them in terms of data for that modeling, which will be, if you think back to the capacity expansion model used in stage 1, we have that pipe and bubble model, right? Representing zonal, and the pipes, as everyone knows, are representing the zonal transfer limits in the base model. What we're going to provide to the NISO is potential increases in the size of those pipes and the cost of increasing the size of each of those pipes based on the analysis that Quanta has done, which then the model can consider that information as something it can select in trying to achieve least cost solutions. Just as it can select local headroom, it will be able to select an increase in those zonal transfer limits at a cost.
Thank you, John. So, and that Quanta study that you said is for each of the solutions. So you run one solution at a time. You add the upgrade, like you add the upgrade, and then you look at sulfur. Was that increased transfer capacity for the limits, the interfaces that are closest to each of those solutions? I don't know how
Yeah,
specific. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we're still undergoing some of the analysis to determine the final data that we would share with the NISO. Again, as a reminder on the process, there's not a requirement to advance any or all of the conceptual bulk solutions into that analysis. And so as we're looking to finalize it, as Quanta continues to refine these conceptual bulk solutions and their cost estimates, we will have some final transfer analysis and effectively provide the most appropriate data for those transfer limit increases and the associated costs. And I think what that means is that if we were looking at there could be data that's provided concept by concept. There could be data that's also provided if it's significantly different for if the entire integrated corridor was implemented in terms of providing options for the model to select from.
Okay. And one question, what is not presented here or hasn't been discussed is the potential that some of those corridors could improve local constraints, but that benefit would not be is not captured in the current framework, correct? For instance, like west to east.
And it inherently can't be captured in the current framework.
I mean, you reported earlier that it's like some constraints were binding, no, in certain areas, but.
Yes, but again, the purpose of this work is to provide modeling data for stage 5. And that modeling data for stage 5 consists of the increases in those zonal transfer limits.
Yeah, it's in one piece, and maybe others will, I see other hands raised. One piece that we were discussing in the past is that some of those 345 kV could, it seems like the way the framework is set up, it's you can only have those bulk solutions as increased transfer limit. But they could also be helping with the local system, but that benefit is not presented in the analysis.
That's the sort of benefit that would come out of, say, something like production cost analysis, right? And so there may be some capability to provide additional information to inform the commission's decision, but in terms of focusing on what will actually go into the stage 5 analysis, you're correct. That can't feed in. So as I noted at the beginning, this work cannot in and of itself fully inform the commission's decision. The way that I've conceptualized it is like it's one thread, and a very important and critical one, but one thread that will be used to kind of weave the full tapestry of information that the commission would need to consider in making a determination as to whether there is a bulk need and what the size and shape of that need definition is.
And this cannot be done by design of the process because bulk is separated from local. But if you had, for instance, like Quanta, do an analysis of both local and bulk, you could optimize for the two.
I think that we have discussed and will continue to discuss ways in which the process can be improved. But where things stand today and where we are with how the process was defined in the order for this first cycle, this is where we're at.
I'm trying to understand like what would trigger the need for bulk in this case in the model, because you will have local solutions that you need for increasing headroom to develop renewables in that zone. This may not be a question to be answered right away, but something that I think will be helpful to address in some way, because you have the local needs that you presumably will need, you have them because you need to build renewables to meet the state goals. How is the model going to choose those bulk solutions, especially if the costs are high, because like 300-mile of transmission, 345 kV transmission, those are high costs. So I'm just trying to conceptualize when a bulk solution would be needed in the model, because it seems like by definition the local solutions get chosen because you need to build those renewables. And
well, remember, the model can elect building different resources in different locations, right? And so the concept behind the least cost analysis will be that the model has the choice to select candidate resources, just as it did in stage one, in various locations. It will also have the ability to select increased headroom at a cost based on the local solutions that are being developed by the utilities. And it will have the ability to select increased zonal transfer limits based on the information that will be provided based on Quanta's work. So if the cost of building resources and local and headroom would be lower overall with one of the increases in bulk transfer limits, the model would have the ability to select that as an alternative to the build outs that were achieved in the initial stage one capacity expansion analysis.
Right, that's exactly what I was going to say, John. You know, one example could be, you know, one zone has a certain amount of headroom, we use it up really quickly, and then it starts going up that curve where there's that multiplier, 15% multiplier for every 1,000 megawatts of headroom. And so that headroom can get pretty expensive pretty quick. And even if that location, that zone has the cheapest, you know, generation, the headroom, the new headroom in the model could get really expensive. And so the model could then choose to build it in the next zone over. So for example, if zone E gets all full up, then the next megawatt is going to trigger a much bigger cost of headroom upgrade. The model could actually choose to build the next megawatt in zone C, whose capital cost is slightly higher than the capital cost of the resources in zone E, but does not trigger that new headroom. And the model would make that decision knowing that it could actually just increase the bulk interface slightly, or, you know, in a chunk to, you know, free up all that extra stuff from zone C to make it through to the rest of the state instead of having to pay for that extra cost in zone E. So there's a few ways it could work out, but that was just trying to give an example, like John was saying, so the headroom gets pretty expensive, so you could always choose different generation, a different zone, paired with bulk in interface increases.
Thank you. Very helpful.
And I saw Liz's hand come up just a second ago, so I want to go to her on this topic, and then we'll jump to Babatunde's question in the chat.
Thanks. I don't know. This may just be me responding to semantics because because I'm not a technical person, but we're not selecting a solution. We're trying to identify a need. And people keep talking in terms of, selecting solutions, and I don't think that's what this model is intended to do. It's intended to give the commission some indicative information about possible bulk system needs.
Right, and even if
I'll stop there before I make it worse.
Yeah, because there's two options, obviously, right? There's a chance that the model, through its economic optimization, does choose some of these bulk interface upgrades as part of the process. And then we say, great, that's what the model said was cheapest. And we evaluate the feasibility of doing that. That's evaluate against the local solutions in that portfolio to see how they interact, and then could be written up as a potential bulk need if we think that is something that does provide a lot of value. There's also the chance that the model, because of some of the unique characteristics of the modeling and how, new generation has to be paired with headroom, like Radhika was saying, there's a chance the model doesn't pick any bulk resources. That doesn't mean there isn't theoretically a need, because if you'll remember, there's a lot of assumptions in these stage 1 models that we had used that kind of minimize the benefits of bulk interface upgrades. If you remember the usage of electrolyzers and batteries, being ideally placed and ideally operated, the ability to use hydrogen in significant quantities in constrained areas. All of these things are serving basically as virtual transmission and hiding a lot of the potential benefits of bulk transmission. And it's going to be up to, staff and the utilities and the NISO and all the commenters to try to, dig through all of the modeling, dig through all of this stuff to kind of point out what might be pulling in either direction and either leading to bulk needs or limiting the model's ability to see that bulk need, so that no matter what happens, the commission has the full story around what was happening here. Because I think in either case, based on what we're seeing in a lot of the other models and some of the more granular modeling, regardless of what drops out of stage 5, there's still the potential that bulk transmission is still valuable, regardless of what a capacity expansion model can tell us. And so that's going to be something really important for us to, continue throughout the conversations and all of our future meetings to keep talking about that and think about it. But Babatunde, did you get your audio working?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I had similar concern with Radhika, and I mean, I know you've tried to address it, but would it be possible to at least provide the benefit for each of the bulk solution? I mean, try to separate them from each other rather than just providing just for the integrated corridor.
Well, again, Babatunde, that's not what's happening in the table. As Bright noted, each of the rows in the table only includes the benefit and cost associated with the portions of the conceptual solutions that impact that particular interface.
Okay, so if I understand that clearly, so at the end of the day, the information that goes to the NISO is going to say, this is the cost for solution proxy option 1, then you have it broken down that way. Is that correct?
Well, no, what will go to the NISO, as I noted, is if we have a pipe in the pipe and bubble model that goes from zone E to zone F, right?
Okay.
We would provide potential increases in the zonal transfer limit represented by that pipe in the pipe and bubble model, and the cost associated with the conceptual bulk solution that would provide that potential increase. And similarly for each of the other pipes in the pipe and bubble model, each of those zonal transfer limits that exist. So it will look a little different from what's in this table because these are showing interface values, like defined interfaces and associated costs, but that's not what goes into the model. It's actually zonal transfer limits and associated costs that go into the model. And similarly, as the existing limits across interfaces had to be translated into zonal limits for the stage 1 modeling, a similar exercise needs to be done for that data that would be provided to the NISO for stage 5 analysis.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I have another question regarding. Sorry, just scrolling back to the. I think it's the proxy solution one. I know it stated that it is from A to C to G. However, the pictorial representation seems to be E, and I keep struggling with that. I don't know. Is there a reason why the you said there is a circle around Fraser, and that seems to be in zone E as opposed to G.
Yeah, yeah, because I mean, we're talking about, and maybe this is something we could communicate a little bit more clearly in terms of the description. But the starting point is in the zones A and C, and that's southern, Western New York and the southern tier area of concern where we're observing the constraints, and we're attempting to get it to zone G. In order to do that, we inevitably have to go through zone E, right?
Yeah,
and hence
correct.
that circle. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So there's a question in the chat asking if the cost estimates from the table have substation expansion costs in there or if it's just line costs.
Those costs, the overall cost estimates are inclusive, but with the caveat that these are like conceptual level cost estimates. We don't have a ton of detailed engineering, but if new substations need to be built or there's particular equipment that would need to be added in terms of transformers or PARs or anything else, that is all wrapped up into the overall cost estimate.
Great, thanks. So I guess the next question is from Chris in the chat. Or Chris, you got your hand up?
Yep. Thanks, Skylar. These are more, I think, clarifying questions. And that is, when you got your result, did that also include, we're going through a state energy planning process right now that will have a 15-year lookout, and that could lead to some changes with respect to kind of the direction. Second item would be, there's been a nuclear announcement to add at least 1 gigawatt of nuclear. Has that been incorporated? And then finally, the last thing is we have a large amount of large load being planned, mostly in the more upstate zones. And how much of that large load is incorporated, because that could also affect potentially flows within the system.
So a couple of things, Chris. In terms of specific assumptions, I would refer you to the assumptions matrix that was provided to EPPAC following the last meeting. Regarding incorporating either information from the draft state energy plan or from the announcement of NYPA's requirement to pursue a gigawatt of nuclear, both of those, well, first, the state energy plan is still in draft form and not finalized. And second, that announcement regarding nuclear came out after the assumptions for this first cycle of CGPP were finalized. And so as a result, neither of those can be incorporated directly into this analysis for the first cycle.
Okay.
However,
go ahead, sorry.
Yeah. However, that is, again, the sort of information that would be very useful for stakeholders to highlight how it may impact results and determinations in the comment process. And they also provide a basis for things that we can consider for the assumptions that will be established for the second cycle that will start shortly after this first cycle is completed.
Okay, and then the last thing on the economic development and the new potential large load.
Again, so those,
Yep.
yeah, so that's, there is an amount of large load included in the assumptions for this analysis. The specifics of the source of those assumptions are included in that assumptions matrix that I referred you to. But again, as, and Quanta presented this last month, I think we may have a reference here again, and there are more details in that assumptions matrix, but we were starting with the most recent FERC 715 cases from the NYSO. Those have a certain amount of large load incorporated into them already. Of course, there are additional large loads seeking interconnection that were not included in those models because they did not meet the requirement, and those have not been explicitly incorporated into our analysis here. And again, that is another evolving issue that we need to both have considered through the comment process and in determining assumptions for the next cycle of CGPP. With the timelines that we have to work on here, we are weeks away from finalizing this work to be able to keep this first cycle's timeline on track. We cannot make updates for all of these, for all of the evolving issues that are coming up. We have to have, for lack of a better term, a lockdown date, and that has passed.
That's the bane of every planning process's existence, right? The lockdown dates. I have a few things I could say about some of the things you mentioned, though. One of the things coming out of the draft state energy plan so far has been, the timelines, like feasible timelines, because they've been able to, start after we started. They've had the benefit of some new information, especially in the federal policy. So they've been able to do some work to consider the impacts of delays and the ability to kind of examine the system again with potentially slower deployments of various infrastructure that has been slowed down by federal policy. So they have some new things we could learn from. And as John said, we can't put it into our model because it's kind of locked down, but we can use that really good information here. And it goes back to some of the things I was saying just a second ago about, if the model is kind of some of the assumptions we have in the model are hiding some of the benefits of bulk transmission. One example also pointed out in the state energy plan is the kind of infrastructure difficulties with hydrogen. Right now, most of our scenarios are relying on this DEFR, that allows electrolysis upstate and then the hydrogen to show up downstate, providing basically virtual transmission. But it's seeming the more we look into this, and I'd encourage everybody to read that state energy plan, and also the 0x40 techno-economic report that just came out a couple days ago. Tremendous amount of detail on a lot of these technologies, and hydrogen's a big one. Talking about the feasibility difficulties and actually putting that type of power system dynamics inside of Zone J. And so if that's the case, something we learned since we've done this, it'd be really helpful for lots and lots of people to think through what that means about bulk transmission upstate to downstate. If we don't have the DEFR capability in downstate New York, maybe that actually means bulk transmission in downstate is even more important than we're already thinking it is. So that's something to look into. You also mentioned the nuclear. John's right, we don't have nuclear in the base case. There was scenario 2, which is going to be moving through stage 5 here in a few weeks. Scenario 2 did have the ability to build a high capital, low operating cost resource. That could have been a number of things, but it's kind of mimics what nuclear would do to a zonal model like this. And so the results of dropping this type of bulk transmission options into scenario 2 kind of mimics what would happen if we gave bulk transmission opportunities in a case with nuclear operating in the state. Because remember, scenario 2 built, I think, like four-ish gigawatts of nuclear by 2040. So that'll at least give us a sense of what it kind of means and what it looks like if nuclear is available and transmissions being built and all that good stuff. So that might give us a taste at the end. In terms of large load, off the top of my head, I think it was somewhere around 3,000 megawatts of large load was incorporated into this modeling in all of our scenarios in the load forecast. That's less than half of the current queue that has just been updated. There's been a lot of stuff coming in the last few months, so it's been skewed a bit by the most recent large loads interconnection requests. I would say though that a lot of the new stuff coming in is kind of duplicates. They're putting in some of these loads are putting in multiple interconnection positions in the queue just to observe the differences in different zones and different magnitudes of their various projects. So I would say there's the queue number right now, which is a little bit over 10,000 megawatts of new large loads. I would say that's not realistic. I would say probably it's more like 7 or 8,000 is the absolute upper bound if everything that puts in an interconnection request goes all the way through to completion. So I'd say the 3,000 megawatt number that we have modeled is a pretty good guess if I was to just pick a number for what amount of large loads we could see in the next 5 to 10 years. It could theoretically go up if more of those new, like very recent large load requests that came in over the summer end up going through, but those extra loads are not incorporated here either. Just that base level of like 3,000 additional megawatts above what we have today.
Thank you.
It's amazing what can happen in a couple of years in the energy system, right? This is crazy. Are there any other questions before we move on to the last item on the agenda? All right, sounds good. Moving on then. I had added this last item to the agenda just to give an update on the JU work and just a forecast of what's happening in stage 5, just so we could make sure everyone was kind of keeping in perspective everything we're doing and what the process looks like moving forward. Was there somebody from the JU that could jump up and just give a quick few-minute overview about what work had been happening in stages 3 and 4 again, and then the process moving forward from the JU's perspective in stage 5? I know most of it was covered last time, so even just an overview of kind of what was covered last time would be good.
Hi, everyone. This is Evan Colsack. Can you hear me?
Yep. Thanks.
Okay. Apologies. I had some issues with my microphone there. All right. So I was prepared to give a brief update on our stage 5 work so far. I think stages 3 and 4 are progressing, and we're still working on our cost estimates and analysis for that, and we're expecting to hit the date of having those completed just before Thanksgiving. As for stage 5, I'll briefly cover what we're expecting for that. So as you may recall from the stage 1 modeling, and we went over a little bit of this in John's presentation, but the structure of the model we're working with is, again, the capacity expansion model, which consists of pipes and bubbles, right? Where we have the 11 New York load zones consist of all the bubbles that we're working with. Now the inputs to the model are going to be this time a little bit different for our local headroom projects. So we'll be inputting those projects, which will tell us how much headroom we're adding, what zone it's going to be located in, the cost, and the in-service date of those projects. They'll likely be grouped into utility divisions. And what these projects can do is they can increase the size of those bubbles. At least that's how I like to think about it. They can increase their size so that generation can be placed in each zone. We'll also have, as we just discussed, the bulk projects, which can be used to increase the size of the pipes. So we'll get the megawatt increase for each pipe, the zones which it's connecting, and the cost at which to expand those pipes. As we know, the model has some constraints on it that drive the generation build out. So we have our clean energy targets and certain reliability requirements. And with all of that, what the model is going to do, it's going to seek to find the minimal cost of transmission and generation. What we'll be looking at, the outputs from this model will be the total megawatt generation added to each zone by resource type. And importantly, the local headroom added to each zone, so we'll know which projects the model decided to select. We'll also know if the model decides to select bulk projects to increase the size of those pipes. And overall, we'll have that optimized, most economic combination of generation and transmission. Now, what we've done recently is with NYSO, we've begun to kind of just test the model with sample projects in order to sort of get ahead and make sure that we're ready to go right after Thanksgiving there with our projects and kick off stage 5. So the goal of this was to just iron out any potential issues with the model prior to that official start date. And it'll allow us to spend our time in stage 5 focusing on the details rather than any modeling issues we may have. And it'll also help us determine the exact timeline for when we plan to wrap up the CGPP process. So what we did is, I believe it was early September, the JU and Quanta provided a list of sample placeholder projects to NYSO. They were not, they don't represent real projects, but they were just samples in order to put something into the model and test it. So using that sample run, we've been able to tease out any potential issues with the model has after applying those projects. So for example, in stage 1, the model is able to select headroom in 1 megawatt increments, but now it'll be selecting blocks of headroom projects that the utilities provide, as well as the bulk interface upgrades. The other thing we did is we're able to test the ability of the model to select prerequisite projects, or rather to ensure that one project is selected by the model before another project is selected, as it makes sense when we're developing our portfolios. So I think it's been a success thus far in preparing us to kick off stage 5 on time and make best use of that time. We'll continue to iron out any final details with NYSO ahead of the Thanksgiving deadline there. And we anticipate being ready for that. I believe it's November 26th deadline for the JU to submit our outcomes from stage 3 and all of our local projects and kick off stage 5. So that's all I have for our stage 5 update, and I'll leave the floor open to any questions.
That was great. Thanks, Evan. Any questions for the JU? Go ahead, Radhika.
Thank you for the update. I appreciate it. I have a question on those local projects that are based on the identified needs. Will this information be provided to EPPAC? Like, what are the top needs that you have identified? Or will there be no information until end of stage 5 or when final portfolio is being selected?
I think just from my perspective, I think we were going to try to work with both Quanta and the JU to see how much of that information we can pack up in convenient packages and provide to EPPAC in terms of, the information that is being seeded into the model, the megawatt opportunity, dollar per megawatts for different areas. Just for review, I mean, we're moving pretty quick, so we're going to have to just, use that information. There's not really going to be much time for review and iteration and changing any of those numbers, but we can try to package whatever we can package up and provide that to EPPAC in the next few weeks whenever it's ready.
Yeah, I think the relevant information for or say anyone, but like at the EPPAC level, but AC New York, for instance, would be like, what are those top constraints that you have identified in each zone? What are the top constraints in the associated solutions that are being put forward? Cost, if possible, but at a minimum, like understanding what are the needs that are being identified for the different scenarios, for the 3 scenarios, or at least one of the stage scenario would be helpful just to understand, okay, this is the those are the constraints that the system that are being identified in the analysis. And I think in the past you noted that you were prioritizing, you had 2 different type of solutions, ones that you would be prioritizing through 2035 and solutions that maybe will be on the bucket list at some point. So it will also be good to understand like what are those longer term solutions. So essentially just more information on the analysis. Understand that you are kind of like running out of time, but it will be beneficial to just provide more transparency on what are those system needs identified and solutions that are being looked at both on the short term and longer term.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. We can look into that and see what we can provide. I know the prioritization by year, I mean, makes a lot of sense. I think that's how we're putting it in the model anyway. In terms of the needs, I mean, the needs and the headroom by zone what already came out of the stage 1 modeling, and that's I think been provided in some of the results, like what was that needed to be built, in all of those zones. And so the only difference now is that we're trying to develop more granular dollars per megawatt information for at least that amount of megawatts so that we know the model can solve by 2035. And so that's kind of the information that like that information will kind of just fall out of the information that's seeded into stage 5, and then it'll have even better information about that once we start getting results from stage 5, and it starts actually selecting the more granular projects as opposed to just the high level kind of average cost projects that we had in stage 1.
But just to clarify, you have the numbers and it's like a number per megawatt or like, but it's behind those numbers, there are particular constraints that have been identified, no? Like, I don't know, one particular constraint is binding in zone C, and there is a transmission solution that's being looked at. You are starting with some concrete transmission facilities that are being overloaded, no? And associated solutions.
Yeah, those numbers do map to specific locations on the system that would require those upgrades. I'm not sure how much granularity we can provide on that. But I'll take that back. I mean, if anybody in GE wants to jump in and just talk to that really quickly, that would be great. Any thoughts on the granularity of data we'll be able to provide from the JU?
Skylar, it's Jeff Marr from National Grid. I think we'll have to take that back and talk it through. We have information, but packaging it in a way that would be helpful or informative, we think is very challenging. We're eventually going to come out with a filing. We're expecting this filing to be fairly significant in terms of like the amount of information that will be in it, and just thinking about how could we possibly condense this down and have a meaningful discussion here, I think is the concern. So we'll have to take it back and see like what could we provide that would be helpful or informative.
Right. Yeah, it's a little bit more complicated than the stuff Quanta has had to put together, because we're going to be providing dollars per megawatt and megawatts for just the zonal interfaces, which I think there's maybe 11 main ones, and I'm not even sure we're going to have numbers for every single one for the model to choose from. So there's a little bit more limited between the zones. But for the utilities, I know there's like dozens of utility districts. Each district has many tranches of potential projects and a ton of constraints. So it will be a little bit more challenging, but we'll see what we can put together for visualization, because I think it would be good for folks to see the stuff that can be seeded into the model. Be a learning experience for everybody, me included. Okay, Julia, go ahead.
Thanks. Thanks for all of this information. It's really helpful to go through. I have two questions. The first question is, so when we get into the stage 5 and, it was stated that it'll pick the local solutions and then it'll pick the bulk solutions, et cetera. Is it just looking at the 3 bulk solutions that have been presented here as the alternatives, or are those just examples?
Yeah, I'd say those are kind of examples that were designed so that we could analyze the individual contributions of different investments to improving the bulk system. What's actually going to be put into the model is the dollars per megawatt and the available amount of megawatts you could theoretically implement in those different interfaces. So the model will actually have the ability to choose, a la carte almost, the components of those various options on their own. We have the ability to, as Evan was saying, to try to maybe put some constraints on there to force some project dependencies. Like if you pick this, you also have to get this. But we're thinking about trying to keep it a little bit more flexible. More constraints means, more difficulty solving. And so we're thinking about trying to just give the model some freedom and flexibility to choose different upgrades between the different zones and see which ones it thinks is the most cost effective. So it's not going to be just trying to pick, west to east, north to south, or integrated. Like that's not how we're going to implement it. At least at the moment, that's not the priority. I think we're going to try to split it up so that each zone can be theoretically increased depending on what the model thinks is best.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. My second question is referring to a question in the comments as well on the commission action. So you've said hopefully the final report will be ready in Q1. There are comments and then the commission could act on the report. Could you just clarify exactly what the commission action is? Is that, or could be, is that like soliciting a PPTN, or are there various options for the action?
Yeah, I think
So-
that is, oh, sorry, go ahead, Liz.
So the commission is going to get this portfolio of proposed solutions and needs. If the commission determines that there is a public policy bulk system need, the commission will refer that need to the NISO for a solicitation per the process that everybody is pretty familiar with. As to local transmission solutions and local transmission needs, the commission will review everything in the portfolio and we'll make some decisions about which solutions to approve for funding, for development and funding. And we expect the utilities will take those back and will begin or complete development of those solutions that are funded through cycle 1. And then we will run cycle 2 and we'll get a refined view of, needs, based on some of those decisions and other things that happen between now and then. And another portfolio of solutions and needs a few years from now. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that does. So would those happen around the same time that the commission gets the portfolio, looks at the proposed solutions, and then ships off into 2 routes, the PPTN to the NISO and the local solution to the utility?
Yes, we're anticipating the commission will, issue an order identifying which local transmission solutions are to be developed and finding and defining a bulk transmission need if the commission determines that there is one.
Okay.
So that would have those 2 decisions should come out in the same action.
Thank you.
Sure.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Skylar. I just switching gears a little bit. I just wanted to follow up on at the end of September, a number of parties put in some comments and also questions, particularly Babatunde and Radhika and others put in some, I believe, are very good questions about clarification of some of the modeling. and I might have missed an iteration here, but I was wanting to check on see if those questions were being addressed and if we expected those within one of the meetings to be addressed by the JU, or how we were going to get answers to those clarification questions about how the modeling was done.
Are you referring to the ones about the bulk system modeling, like the bulk needs assessment modeling?
No, along with the bulk system modeling, there were a number of questions that were submitted around the modeling for for stage 3 and 4 and what was being done there. I want to make sure those weren't lost, because I think there were some really important clarifications that the stakeholders need to understand.
Got it. Let me try to see if I can bring those up.
I mean, yeah, you don't necessarily have to do it at real time of this meeting, but maybe you could go back to those comments. I don't know if Babatunde or Radhika want to chime in here, but I believe they both sent questions. I know they talked to me a little bit about it, and I think that would be really helpful if you could circle back with JU and just make sure we're getting answers to those clarifications.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sounds good. We'll definitely loop back on that and see if there's any of those stage 3 and 4 questions that might have slipped through the cracks when we were doing the bulk needs assessment updates.
Yeah,
But I know
I
we
think
received-
some of Radhika's also went to stage 5 questions as well.
Yeah, yep. Sounds good. And we're planning on having another EPPAC meeting here in the next few weeks. Hopefully before Thanksgiving, but maybe the week after or 2 weeks after, just to make sure we can give everybody the update, publish the data, and give an update on whatever work has happened there. But we'll try to get something before that if there's any specific questions that we can just answer quickly.
Great, thank you.
Go ahead, Radhika.
Just building on this comment and my prior question, and I understand there is a timeline to meet before Thanksgiving, and even if the information provided to EPPAC it happens shortly after, I think it will be important to present some of the findings. Like one of the comments we had shared over the emails where from AC New York standpoint, where like, what are those transmission needs that you are seeing? And it can be in the form of like those corridors, low voltage local corridors are binding by 2035. Those are the, kind of like reconductoring that corridor or rebuilding that corridor is the solution that is being proposed, or for stage 5 analysis. So I think, like for any transmission planning exercise, it will be helpful to understand what are those hot spots in the system that were identified. And yeah, like at least the top 3 spots. And I understand there might be more than one upgrade associated with each of those needs, but it will be, I think, important to provide that information before we see it in a final report. Just to better understand.
It's Liz. Can you clarify that for me a bit? I mean, that's clearly something that we expect the JU to identify in the report. That's one of the objectives of the exercise, is to identify needed upgrades. And why do you need to have them before they are presented in the final report?
For transparency at the EPPAC level, for understanding what you are seeing on the system.
Well, but you're going to see that. I mean, everybody's going to see that at the same time when the report comes out. I'm just trying to understand, transparency is an important thing, an important value. We try to provide a lot of transparency into how the process is being put together. But I'm just wondering why you need the results sooner. Oh, shoot. Why you need the results before they're actually, ready. I think there's some pros and cons to doing that. Since we're expecting the utilities to put their best case forward in the final report as to what the needs are and how they should be prioritized. And I'm not sure what the value is in sharing the needs just sort of generally before before the package is ready. I'll take it back and think about it, but I'm not quite sure I understand how that would enable you to provide better input to the remainder of the process.
When is the timeline for providing this final report? Is it in Q1 when it gets submitted to the, what is the timeline on your side to provide this final report?
Skylar, what's our expectation?
I think the original target was end of the year this year, but it's going to be tough to get stage 5 and 6 done and the report written by then. So it's probably in Q1 of this year, of next year coming up.
So it's a difference of a couple of months. But I'm just curious. I believe in transparency. We want a transparent process, but we also don't want to bog people down, you know, and create confusion later. So just wanted to ask you to think about that.
Right, because we will have, you know, obviously we have the headroom needs by zone published already. We're going to have dollars per megawatt that was seeded into the model. That's going to be posted for the EPPAC. We're also going to have the results of stage 5 posted, which will show you the individual headroom projects selected by zone. And then there'll be the final report that maps those headroom projects from the model to the actual proposed and engineered projects that the JU could actually implement. So that's what, you know, you all will be seeing the whole time. If there's something beyond that, you know, we'd have to take that back and see, you know, what whether it's possible and what value we could add to that.
So will you be showing the stage 5 results before the report? That's kind of like, that's part of what I'm asking.
Yeah,
We are
I
going to
think that's the
see.
plan. I think there's a plan to have technical like not a technical conference, an EPPAC meeting sometime in maybe December or January, whenever the stage 5 results are ready. The order calls out stage 5 as one of the times to interact with the EPPAC and kind of preview those results. And so that type of information will be provided publicly before the final report is written. But the full mapping of those, you know, selected projects from the model to actual, you know, rate case quality design proposals from the JU, that's not going to be ready for anybody until the final report anyway. So I think that's where Liz is going. And we can't necessarily try to hold up the report to get the JU to develop some extra work just to share here before they can do that engineering work. I think there's just a, you know, a timing issue and a sequencing issue here where we're going to try to provide all the information we can while we're going. But the final rate case quality proposals that we all need to interpret and comment on will be coming out in the final report.
Okay, I mean, if you are going to present something in stage 5, I'm like what I have in mind, and maybe it's just a translation between what I'm saying and what everyone else is understanding. But in other markets, or even like if we take New York ISO case, we are being told as those analyses are being done or finalized, those are like hot spots that we are seeing on the system. Like in this scenario, by 2035, those are the 5 system needs. I understand that you are still working through the upgrades, but I guess if we have them in, if this information or some sort of information is presented in December, it's fine. I mean, I think it will be our challenge a little bit, the transparency. If EPPAC members are seeing what is being proposed in a final report, because I feel like the purpose of this exercise was to understand, like work on assumptions and then get information on what are those top system needs, like what are the major, most overloaded corridors in, you know, at least areas with higher renewable expectations, to just inform expectation for where potential upgrades could be proposed, and understand how that could also line up with the bulk. And I think there is also this, like we have always talked at IC New York level about like, oh, there could be, it's not just bulk versus local, it can also be hybrid solutions. But I don't think hybrid is even possible to some extent, because you are now looking at whether a bulk solution could alleviate some of the local constraints or partially relieve. So it seems like the bulk solution is just if you need that transfer, increasing transfer capacity among zones, and that's determined also on those local headroom, like how easy or hard or expensive it is to get local headroom. If it's very cheap to get local headroom, let's say in a zone E where you have a ton of renewables, then you don't need bulk transfer. So like to some extent that local information is very critical in terms of what are those needs and how expensive it is to increase headroom, because it also impacts the bulk and the need for bulk in the modeling and the optimization.
Yeah, I think there's a number of challenges with the hybrid type solutions. I think we are going to try to have everybody interpreting all the results from what local headroom projects are chosen, what bulk needs might be identified, and then that's a part where just because of the modeling and the way the kind of definitions break down in New York State, it's been very difficult to incorporate that hybridization concept into the modeling. I think it might be theoretically possible, and we want to work on that for future cycles. But at the moment, it's mostly going to be kind of a manual process where we're going to have to work with an ISO and the JU to interpret what the model outputs are, in that breakdown of bulk versus local, to see if some of those things are synergistic or if some of them are either complementary or contradictory, and try to interpret the results that way to see if there are some hybrid options there. So that's a really good flag. That's, something that's not going to come out of the model, but we will still have the opportunity. It's not to say that it's impossible for the CGPP to identify those right now. It's just going to be a little bit more of a manual process than just having it kind of told to us through the model. I think a lot of the stuff we've been able to provide so far through the system mapping information and the capacity expansion outputs so far have shown a lot of those hotspots where the headroom is needed the most, where the model is trying to select those resources from the supply curve. So I think we have a lot of really good information about likely transmission needs. The more specific stuff will hopefully come out of stage 5. We have yet to see what that is and how similar it is to the stage 1 modeling, but I imagine since the supply curve isn't changing, and the amount of needs aren't really changing, the amount of generation we need. So I'm imagining the results will stay fairly consistent with stage 1, and in that case, we already kind of know where the stressed sections of the grid are likely to be. And we're going to be providing those types of numbers, the megawatts and the locations and the types of projects and the dollars in stage 5. So I'm not sure what else we can really provide right now, given the other the considerations on confidentiality and the temporary results that we don't actually have developed into rate case quality solutions. So we can take that back and see what other information we can potentially provide about local components of the grid that are constrained or are assumed to be constrained based on the stage 1 results. But we'll have to take that back and see if we have that, or if that would be incremental work to what's being done for stage 5.
And I see that more like as a result of the stage 1, but also like stage 3, because stage 3 was the local assessment. So based on the stage 2 models, so stage 1 was the capacity expansion modeling long term, where you get the generation with an expectation of increased headroom with the generic assumptions used. Stage 2 was about developing the nodal models, the power flow models with those assumptions, long-term zonal assumptions. And stage 3 was identifying what's, like what the needs are, what's overloading on the system. So to me, it's more like the results of stage 3. And again, I'm not saying, like I understand there is a timeline and we all want that timeline to be met before Thanksgiving. But it will be helpful to provide some information, or at least a written, like this is the timeline we have for the final report to be offered stage 5, to better understand when we get that information on like what are those local needs that are identified. I don't know how many needs there are, like at least in the tops, in a few areas that are where you find where there are most, I guess it could be like maybe it's too specific to renewables, but I don't know how easy it will be to develop that, or something that you are doing overall in the report, in the final report, but it's more like a preview for us on the EPPAC side. I can take this back as well and get more feedback, as well as if you are willing to take this back.
I'll just speak for my side of the house. We've had slippage in the schedule. We're really anxious to let get the work done, the primary work done, and get the report out. So unless there's some really compelling, need for somebody to go and collate or, do whatever to try to give you a preview, I hesitate to ask people to add that to their plates when we are really trying to get this work done. We are very, we all know we have deadlines, we have schedules, we have objectives, we have the real world changing, faster than we can keep up with it. We really are anxious to focus on getting the report out as early in the 26 as possible. So if you would think about that, we will as well.
Sounds good.
You go ahead, Julia.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to add on to Rodica's point and noted that we don't want anything that would interfere with being able to deliver the report as quickly as possible. But from New York City's perspective, I do think there could be a benefit in a few months of a change, having information a few months early rather, because we're particularly concerned about the new NISO STAR report that shows the reliability issue in 2026. And we're also still looking and tracking that 2024 PPTN solicitation. So I think there are some things that are near term that if as soon as information is available, it's helpful to have, just from a short-term needs perspective. But I think this was discussed in pretty detail, just adding that component.
Julia, I totally understand, totally get that those are critical. I don't think there's going to be anything. This portfolio is focusing on needs farther out than the needs addressed in the recent STAR report. So again, I'm not sure that it serves much of a purpose to try to preview the results of the modeling. But and if we're talking about a few months, that's when the report's going to be out anyway. So.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, I think there was one other question in the chat that we hadn't gotten to yet, from Peter. I think the answer to that, and Bright or John can jump in. I think the question was, the interfaces. I think there was 5 interfaces listed with costs associated with them. I think the question in the chat was, there's more than 5 interfaces in the state, and were the non-listed interfaces, did they have no impact and no costs associated with them, or were they kind of merged with the other projects? I think it could be a mixture of both of those things. Some of those projects, do not implicate some of the other zones, so they're just not going to be listed, but some of the projects might have gone through a zone, and so partially those zones may have had costs, but the actual project interface upgrades were attributed to the project zone listed in the table. In the final list of projects and the way it's actually implemented into the capacity expansion model, we can actually break that down by which specific zones the dollar value is kind of attributed to, as opposed to just the interface that's really benefiting from the project. So that will be clear when the information is presented in the final kind of table that we present. Any other questions? All right, well, in that case, I think we'll close the call. We're going to keep moving forward on our way to implementing the stage 5.
Wait, Skylar, there was
Yeah.
a
Was
late question in the chat. When will that
there?
table be
Oh,
available?
yeah, whenever we're able to kind of finalize that stage 5, the stage 5 inputs, which should be in the next few weeks, and then we'll package it up and be able to post that to the EPPAC website and send it around by email to the folks here.
Thanks.
Thank you. I was about to close out with missing that one. We'll keep moving forward on the stage 5 work, and have an update. Look for more emails from us answering some questions, and I'll go back and look through any of those comments that have been submitted from the previous information requests and see if there's anything we haven't addressed yet, and then get back to those folks as soon as we can. Thanks for joining today, and we'll talk to you in a few weeks. Have a good one.
Thank you.